Was anyone else caught off guard when this so-called PLE turned it into a weekly episode of NXT halfway through, which affected the momentum of the whole show? Just me, or anyone else? NXT Vengeance Day was the first PLE of the year for NXT. So how was it? Let's not waste any more time. Let's just get straight into my thoughts on the show. You know how these videos work now. I've done plenty of them. So let's not waste any time and let's jump in. The show itself started off in many ways like any WWE show now, without a video package hyping up the show. Instead, here's a bunch of the roster arriving earlier in the day, ready for the show. Now, this was, and this allows me to just give my honest thoughts on this presentation as a whole, because when they first started doing this, when a couple of years ago, I believe, when Triple H first took over, it felt different. It felt good. It was different. It was new. Now, the fact that every show under WWE does this, that different new vibe has completely gone, and it's just like, right, it's no different from an episode of Raw, SmackDown, main roster, PLE, anything. They're all the same. So yeah, really would have liked a video package here instead of, here's a bunch of lads that turned up earlier. But hey ho. The show started off with Blake Monroe versus Jada Parker in a street fight. This definitely was a fun way to kick off Vengeance Day, with this plunder match with loads of spots in it. The crowd was very hot to begin with, so having a plunder match with Jada Parker in, who the crowd were completely behind, especially as the match begun, because the match itself started off spilling to the outside, where Jada did very quickly got a table out, which the crowd loved because obviously tables are like sweets to them. But then we got some good heel work from Blake, who responded after taking out Jada briefly by putting the table back under the ring to boos from the crowd. And once they got back in the ring after a brawl-in on the outside, we got what I would say was one of the most inventive spots I've ever seen, as I've never seen this spot done in this specific way presented, as Jada hit a toe hold drop on Blake onto a steel chair. You might be going, well, that's not nothing new. Seen that several times. The chair's laid out, drop toe hold, boom, face onto the chair. Yeah, we've seen that several times, countless times over the years. But the way they did it differently here was they got the chair wedged between some kendo sticks in the ropes, so Blake went into the chair on the ropes, and that looked really cool. Different. It's something we've seen before, but in a different way. This is what I like. So it was a really cool visual, I personally think, because that gave Jada the chance to grab a second, and set up another table on the outside for a spot later to come. I mean, again, like I said, the crowd were really good for this match. They loved it. They had a great time. We got another spot, a fun spot of Jada getting stuck in the tree of woe, with a chair in front of her face, so she got sandwiched as Blake hit a running hip attack, before things yet again spilt to the outside, where they got a bit of back and forth. But Jada is able to get the upper hand, luckily, as she hits a teardrop on Blake through the table that she already set up. In the like I said, previously mentioned table spot that she set up. but things really started heating up in the finish after Blake kicked out of the table spot. A very close 2 count, I will say, as Blake now back in the match. Like I said, we get to the finish of the match. It wasn't a long match, but it was. We're luckily with a plunder match. You don't want it to go on for too long, like a match like this. You want a couple of spots to keep the fans interested before they get fed up. And these two knew that. They quickly got to the match where Blake was able to recover after the table spot. It looked like Jada was going for something on the top rope. Blake stopped her before she introduced a bag of what we all come to expect as wrestling fans. If you see a bag pulled out from under the ring, thumbtacks. But obviously, this being Blake, she put her own glamour twist on it, as it was a bag full of diamonds, which she spread across the floor, only to hit a Hurricane Rana on on Jada from the top rope. So she landed straight into the diamonds, followed with the final nail in the coffin as Blake hit the glamour shot DDT on Jada for the win. Blake Monroe winning this fun plunder street fight to kick off Vengeance Day in a very hot way. Like I said, very fun match, very good way to kick off the show. Then we got our first of 4 backstage segments of the night, and this is probably the best one because it sets up the main event. As we see in the locker room, Ricky Saints confronting Ethan Page about where he was on the previous week's episode of NXT, only to kind of change tactics when he sees that the former North American champion, Ethan Page, is still depressed, and that after losing his championship to Miles Bourne. So Saints tries changing tactics to try and motivate Page into focusing on, instead of focusing on his loss and losing the NXT North American Championship, to helping him win and recapturing the NXT Championship tonight against Joe Hendry. Like I said, this was the first of 4 backstage segments. Yeah, this was a fine one. Probably, like I said, probably the best, as it set up what was to come in the main event. This led to the second match of the night, which was Tony D'Angelo versus Dion Lennox. This match is one of 2 halves, as it actually began with Lennox, who we saw during the opening of the night, waiting in the car park of the PC, waiting for D'Angelo to arrive. As that is what happens, as the match itself doesn't start yet, as things begin with an basically extended brawl between the two in the car park, into the backstage area, and then they slowly make their way around to the rings area. For me, this half of the match wasn't anything really special. It was just standard walk and brawl, you know. D'Angelo got the upper hand for a bit, then Lennox got the upper hand thanks to help from Dark State. Tony then got the upper hand afterwards, and then the Dark State again helped Lennox, only for, luckily, for D'Angelo, some surprising help from OTM, who jumped Dark State indirectly, evening up the odds, allowing D'Angelo and Lennox to pick up where they left off. Now, this time, completely leaving the car park area right into the backstage of the PC, to which this point is when the second half of the match really begins and is probably the stronger part, as it had a few spots in it. As after following them backstage, the camera quickly cuts to the hard cam in the actual ringside area, to which they both burst through the NXT tower for a great spot and a great visual, as the crowd weren't expecting it. This leads to them finally getting in the ring, and the match officially starting. And weirdly, after all that, they kind of come down. It's, they trade a bit afterwards. You had the preamble to begin with, and now time to bring the crowd down before the finish. We got some standard stuff in the ring before the action again spills to the outside, where Lennox looks to Pillmanize D'Angelo's ankle with the steel steps for a great spot, a great visual, only for Lennox to get pushed into the crowd by D'Angelo, setting up the finish of the match, where after a suplex off the barricade through the announce table, which is the second best part of the match, we get back into the ring where D'Angelo picks up the win after a spear and a fisherman suplex. Overall, I would say this is a fine match. I personally would say the two spots of the bursting through the tower, the NXT tower, and the suplex through the announce table saved the match from being just forgettable. But even though the walk and brawl was standard, and the action in the ring did kind of bring down the crowd, this was another win in Vengeance Day's book for the crowd. They were very hot for it to begin with, and as we see, it's again probably one of the strongest things on the whole night as we get further in. But like I said, Tony D'Angelo able to pick up the win over Dion Lennox in a fine enough match. Next came the best match on the entire card for me, as Izzy Dane versus Tatum Paxley for the North American Championship. Unlike the past two matches, we actually got a recap video with everything that has happened over the past couple of months with Izzy, Tatum, and the Cullen as a whole, following from Halloween Havoc last year, where Tatum won the NXT Women's Championship with the help of the Cullen and Izzy, teasing that Izzy might turn on Tatum, to then costing her in the end, costing her the title in the end at Gold Rush, then losing to Izzy at Deadline. So now we have arrived at this final chapter of this feud, to what has become a decent feud for NXT, in my opinion. The match itself has started off really extremely hot, with Tatum jumping Izzy the second the bell rings, really getting over how heated this feud has become. And that's great because it just shows that these two are two of the strongest women on the NXT roster, and that NXT has got some great feuds going on at the time. Anyway, like I said, things start off hot with Tatum getting the momentum to begin with, but things do eventually slow down as the momentum flips to Izzy taking control, giving the match a more hard-hitting feeling, which works considering the intensity of this rivalry. You want that more hard-hitting effect. But it was never in doubt. The crowd were always behind Tatum throughout this match. They wanted to see Tatum beat Izzy, win the North American Championship, and finally put this feud with the Cullen behind her. Izzy's able to kind of get not Izzy. Tatum is able to kind of get the upper hand as we get a really great spot as Tatum is able to reverse a Boston Crab by Izzy, turning it into one of her own. Beautiful transition of one Boston Crab into another. Like I said, love that transition. This leads to Tatum finally making her comeback after Izzy had her run for a while. Even though Tatum was able to make a comeback, didn't stop Izzy from getting a close 2-fall after avoiding a 450 attempt by Tatum. That had the crowd on the edge of their seats, thinking Izzy had won and had escaped with the title yet again. From one false finish to another, we then got, this time with the tables turned, as Tatum then got Izzy with her own high dive, followed by a 450, this time for a close count. Again, the crowd were on the edge of their seat, thinking this was going to be the finish of the match. This was awesome, and it all culminated in what I thought was a really good finish for me, as it saw Tatum attempt a dive onto Izzy on the outside, who then reverses it into a powerbomb of her own onto the apron. Remember, old school NXT with Kevin Owens and Sami Zayn. That's the hardest part of the ring for a cool spot, only then to repeat the finish of Deadline, as after Tatum is able to get back up, she throws Izzy in the ring, and just like at Deadline, Shawn Spears distracts Tatum with the dolls. It looks like we're going to see a repeat of the finish, but this time Izzy doesn't fall for it. She's able to take him out, get back in the ring, land a cemetery drive on Izzy for the win. Your new North American champion, Tatum Paxley. This was a great match, and a great culmination to their feud, as well as is easily the match of the night for me, especially after what comes next, and is proof that NXT's women's division is arguably the best in WWE and might be worth arguing best currently in the entire wrestling industry. That's just my thoughts, though. At the end of the day, like I said, great match. Highly recommend you check this match out if you haven't. Then we got our second backstage segment of the night, where we see OTM being interviewed backstage on why they involved themselves in the car park brawl of D'Angelo versus Lennox. They reveal their actions, saying this was nothing to do with D'Angelo. They weren't there to help him. Nothing. They were strictly there for Dark State, and they are now putting Dark State on notice as they're still coming for them and they're not finished with them. A fair enough segment, giving an answer to what happened earlier and setting up what's to come down the line. Then we got the chain reaction of the downfall of Vengeance Day for me. From this point on, until the main event, which even that gets affected by this, we're now not on a PLE, we're in a episode of NXT, as we get an in-ring segment as we see Robert Stone out in the ring, about to give an announcement about the NXT Women's Championship and what's in its future, only for JC Jane to come out, the champion, to cut a promo. Wasn't anything special, only for Zarya then to come out, interrupt JC's promo with a promo of her own, only for there to be, I would say, was an issue with production, as there was definitely a bit of a longer pause between Zarya finishing and when Soul Rooker's music finally played. Clearly, Soul's music wasn't meant to kind of cut off Zarya. So yeah, then this brings the interruption brigade to a halt as Soul Rooker joins, where we get a bit of a back and forth between all three, to the point where Stone has to shout over them to announce that on the following week's episode of NXT, it will be a triple threat between the three for the championship. Like I said, this is a PLE. This sort of segment does not belong on an episode of, or on a PLE. This belongs on a weekly episode of NXT. This definitely killed the mood and kind of brought the momentum down, especially after such a great match that was Izzy versus Tatum. And unfortunately, the show just couldn't recover from this, I'm afraid. In our third backstage segment of the night, things don't get any better, as this just felt like it was an episode of NXT, and this belonged on an episode of NXT, as we see Birthright approach both Tavion Heights and Charlie Dempsey, trying to convince Dempsey to join Birthright. This, I've got nothing really much to say about this segment as a whole. This really belonged on an episode of NXT, setting up the following NXT, as it is doing here, as they set up a match between Birthright and Charlie and Tavion. Like I said, this portion of the show really feels like a weekly episode of NXT, I'm afraid. Then we get Lola Vice versus Kalani Jordan in an NXT Underground match. Before I get into the match itself, I need to say something. I'm not a fan of UFC or MMA, however you want to, mixed martial arts, that sort of sport. It's just not for me. I've never been interested in it. But what I hate even more than that is WWE's constant attempt at trying to do worked MMA, but treating it as if it was a shoot real fight. Because firstly, you're telling your audience that everything else is not real that they see on the show, unlike this, as the rules are closer to MMA than wrestling. And the second reason is worked MMA has never looked good or convincing ever. There's a reason why Ronda Rousey versus Shayna Baszler at SummerSlam 2023 was a terrible match. Because they were treating it as real, but in doing so made it look worse than it already was. If it doesn't seem like I'm talking much about the match thus far, that's because I don't enjoy this stipulation. I did not enjoy this match for good reason, because the match, well, it was bad. There's nothing I can say. I thought this was a bad match. And it goes about 5 minutes as well. With the match itself, though, seeing both women start off trading holds, trying to give the match a semi-realistic vibe, which is okay, only for then they just throw that out the window and decide to go and do a worked wrestling match, as Kalani gets the upper hand thanks to using the ring post as a weapon, which kind of defeats the point of having a UFC MMA style match. As Kalani leaves the ring to use the go on the steel steps to use the ring post, leading to Lola having a injured arm throughout the rest of the match. Then we get, obviously, that is a heel spot as well. Sorry, I should have mentioned that is a full-on heel 101 wrestling spot in a match that is being presented as a MMA match. Despite the injury, though, Lola is able to fight back through the pain, leading to the finish of the match, where after giving Kalani a taste of her own medicine with the ring post, and the action briefly spilling to the outside, which again really doesn't help the MMA sort of vibe they're trying to go for. To which they get back in the ring. Lola wins with a spinning back fist for the TKO win. Like I said, as you can tell, nothing much in this match, and this was a bad match. Worst match on the card by far. And to be honest, after I've done this video and talked about this match, I will have completely forgotten about it, because I completely forgot about it until I had to read about this match again. It's just how it is. Sorry if you enjoyed this match, fair play to you. It just wasn't for me. In our fourth and final backstage segment of the entire evening, we see a crazed JC Jane worried about the previously announced triple threat against Sol Rucker and Zarya, but both Fallon Henry and Lainey Reed try to calm down the champ. Once again, this was a segment from NXT. It's just another time waster segment on the show to pad it out. And like I said, this is the fourth backstage segment of the night, and they decline in quality for me. I just don't get it why we really had to have an episode of NXT in this PLE. This leads us all to the main event of the show. Joe Hendry versus Ricky Saints for the NXT Championship. In his first title defense since winning the NXT Championship in the ladder match back in February, Hendry's facing the former champion Saints, who, now looking back on it, with how things have unfolded, I honestly feel he shouldn't have beaten Oba for the title back at No Mercy. If he had only, if Oba was only going to regain it a month later, and then pretend like he didn't lose it, only then to vacate it before going up to the main roster, things would work better if Oba had one big long reign as NXT champion, vacate it because the ruler was undefeated. No one could defeat him for the NXT Championship before heading up to the main roster. He drops the belt, which means, yes, Ricky wouldn't have had a reign with the belt, but you could have him win it later down the line. I just think, looking back on how things have unfolded, it kind of there is a bit of it's a bit muddly for me. Anyway, the match itself, was it able to bring the show back on track, or does it close the next day on a flat finish? Let's find out. As the match itself starts with Saints gaining control of the match for a while, due to Hendry getting caught up in the ropes early on. Hendry, though, is able to find his footing and make some sort of momentum as Saints goes for a rope walk, but slips on it, falls to the outside, leading to a brief brawl on the outside between the two. Sadly, though, at this point of the match, it doesn't feel any special. It just feels like a bog standard match with Saints gaining control again, and the match being very much 80 to 20, with Saints taking a loss of the match. Luckily, though, as we come into the third act of the match and come close to the finish, things do pick up, as after a submission spot, which for some reason, as you all know, I have a particular thought on how WWE present their submissions. Either pick the he's out, or do the drop one, drop two, drop three, he's out. Pick one. I don't mind which one you're choosing, but you can't jump between the two. As we saw in AJ Styles' retirement match at the Royal Rumble, the ref just tapped his hand, he's out. That's how AJ Styles' career ended. Here, though, the ref decided to drop Joe Hendry's hand once, twice, and then he came back into it. Personally, I prefer that one, but it's more of you can't have both. You have to pick one. Anyway, sorry about that rant. It just annoys me that they are still doing that. This then leads to Ethan Page finally coming down to the ring, as was alluded earlier in the show, like I said previously, with the backstage segment. As he gets to the ringside, Page does pause looking at the championship before grabbing it and waiting for the opportune moment to use it. Which brings us to the finish of the match, where Saints, after hitting a spear on Hendry, asks Page to pass him the belt, and that. So Page throws it, but overshoots it as it gets stuck in between Hendry and Saints, which leads to a tug of war spot between the two with the belt, with the ref getting involved, grabbing the belt, taking it out of both of the wrestlers' hands, leading to Saints hitting a low blow on Hendry and almost getting the win off of a Revolution DDT, only for Hendry to kick out at 2, get back up, and almost get the ref involved in a move, leading to a close ref bump, only for behind the ref's back, payback as Hendry hits a low blow onto Saints, followed by the standing ovation for the win, as Joe Hendry retained the NXT Championship in his first title defense to close out the show. Like I said, this was a single swim main event for it. Could it save the show as a whole, or would it sink? For the most part, this, like I said, was a bog standard match. But I wouldn't be wrong in saying that the finish of the match and the use of Ethan Page in it didn't save the match, didn't ruin the match, and it did save it in the end for me. So as a whole, I thought this was a good to fine main event. In conclusion, NXT Vengeance Day is a show of two halves. Everything up to and including the North American Championship was really good as a show and really felt worthy of being on a PLE. Unfortunately, like I've said multiple times throughout this video, an episode of NXT then took over for a chunk of the match, ruining the momentum. You had the in-ring segment that was completely pointless and had no point of being on an NXT PLE. You had the countless backstage segments that weren't fitting of being a PLE backstage segment. The bad match between Vice and Kalani in the NXT Underground. But then we got the main event, which, like I said, was bog standard up until the finish, but the finish was good enough to save that match. So NXT Vengeance Day, overall, for me, mixed bag. First half, solid. Would recommend it. Definitely the first two women's matches. Blake and Jada really kicked off the show in a hot way, and Tatum and Izzy were the best match on the card. Definitely recommend those two matches. You might like D'Angelo Lennox. I just personally found you had the two spots in it, and the rest was fine. But yes, this is a mixed bag, and personally, I think it's also a misstep for NXT, who have been on a steady, solid, positive pace of their PLEs, and I felt like this was a misstep for me. But that's just my thoughts on NXT Vengeance Day 2026. What are yours? Give me your thoughts. I would like to hear them. Until the next video, I hope you enjoyed this. I'll see you soon. Bye.